What if I told you that the greatest betrayal of my life occurred during my sister's wedding? This is the tale of a daughter who believed she would finally have her moment, only to discover that it was never her destiny. It was always about Melanie when I was growing up. Melanie was the darling, the golden child, and the one who was impervious to punishment. I was just there, in the meantime. I was always an afterthought, but I wasn't exactly neglected. My parents made no effort to conceal it. Melanie was able to get what she desired. I had to work for what I wanted, or else I would have to forget about it. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. Allow me to explain. Jessica is my name. Melanie is 25 and I am 27. I should have the advantage because I'm older. Not at all. It was Melanie who brought the space to life. Blue eyes, blonde hair, and a heartwarming grin. And me? Brunette with brown eyes and medium height? Melanie took center stage, and I melted into the background. Always. Melanie used to get the larger slice of cake on our birthdays when we were kids, I recall. Melanie received a trip to the mall if we both brought home good report cards. While I received a good job, Jess. My parents hardly noticed when I joined the high school basketball team. However, when did Melanie become cheer captain? She must have won the Olympics. Nevertheless, I assured myself that things will balance out as we grew older. When we grew up, the partiality would stop. I would establish my own area, create a life in which I was no longer in competition with Melanie. It nearly succeeded. I worked a part-time job and received scholarships to pay for my education. I obtained my own apartment, had a marketing career, and even managed to keep up a respectable social life. I no longer felt envious of Melanie. I was truly delighted for her, or so I believed. Then Melanie became engaged. At that point, everything fell apart. It began modestly. I must admit that I was ecstatic for Melanie when she called to share the news. How could I not be, after all? She sounded so pleased, and she was my sister. Then the planning for the wedding started. Melanie chose a stunning country club, with chandeliers and an ocean view as the location. Everything was funded by my parents. And I mean all of it. It must have cost tens of thousands of dollars for the caterers, the flowers, and the clothing. Nothing was too good for Melanie, of course. I dismissed it. How my parents spent their money was none of my business. For a brief, bright moment, though, I believed that perhaps things were turning around when Melanie asked me to be her maid of honor. Perhaps for the first time, Melanie recognized me as a significant figure in her life. Oh, how naive I was. I was immediately made to feel like a glorified helper rather than a respected sister. Melanie provided me with a thorough to-do list that included scheduling the bridesmaids' gowns, organizing the bachelorette party, and resolving any guest issues, whatever that meant. The dress was the next item. For the bridesmaids, Melanie chose these form-fitting, strapless satin gowns in pastel pink. However, the dress didn't zip all the way when I went for my fitting. Melanie responded with a wrinkled nose. Perhaps you might go to the gym before the wedding? I dismissed it with a giggle. However, I sensed the old sting returning from within. The sensation that one is never quite enough. 2 weeks prior to the wedding, things reached a breaking point. Melanie sounded desperate when she called me. Jess! Oh my God, you won't believe this, she exclaimed, her voice full of gasping enthusiasm. I've got the most incredible idea. I prepared myself. What is it? She dragged out the word, so. Are you aware of how self-reliant and career-focused you've always been? Oh, yeah? Well, given that you don't have a boyfriend and that you're not really into relationships or anything, with a knot in my stomach, I interjected. Melanie, what are you trying to say? Her voice turned saccharine sweet as she said, I was talking to Mom and Dad, and we reasoned that perhaps you could forfeit your +1 spot. You don't really need it, do you? We could then invite one more individual to join Brian's side. I became motionless. You want me to part with my companion? We're kind of tight on the guest list, but Brian's cousin's girlfriend really wants to come. And this was approved by Mom and Dad? Even though I already knew the answer, I still asked. Obviously! They believe it to be entirely logical. They did, of course. My chest began to constrict. The +1 wasn't the point. The principle was at issue. Melanie assumed that I wouldn't even need the opportunity to bring someone because my life was so meaningless and lifeless. Jess? Melanie's voice was sweet and syrupy as she spoke. With trepidation, I inhaled. All right, I replied. Anything. Really? God, you are the greatest! Melanie gave a little squeal. I knew you would comprehend! I woke up that night and stared at the ceiling. The same emotions from childhood returned, including the resentment and the weariness of being ignored all the time. I remained silent in front of my parents. What was the purpose? They would consistently choose Melanie's happiness over mine. When the wedding weekend finally arrived, I forced a smile. Melanie looked like a magazine cover as she floated down the aisle, and I stood beside her. At the reception, despite the knot in my chest when Melanie hardly recognized it, I made a sincere toast. Then, as the evening was coming to an end, I went to the bridal suite to retrieve my handbag. I heard them at that point. Melanie chuckled. The gentle, happy voice of my mother. Melanie remarked, I'm just so glad Jessica was okay with giving up the +1. I mean, nobody would have accompanied her anyhow. What about my mother? She merely chuckled. Something broke inside of me. With my hands shaking and my heart thumping in my chest, I left that room. I had allowed them to treat me like an afterthought my entire life, as if I were throwaway. No more. I texted Melanie the following morning to let her know that I would not be going to the post-wedding breakfast. I hope it's fantastic. No justification. Don't apologize. The icy reality. Melanie attempted to contact. I didn't respond. I wasn't going to act like the good sister for once. And truthfully, it was a really nice feeling. I anticipated criticism. My dad's guilt trips, my mom's passive-aggressive texts, and perhaps even a theatrical Facebook post about how family is everything were all I expected. But the quiet was worse. There was silence for 2 days following the wedding. Not an SMS message. No call. No one even seemed to realize that I had vanished. By now, I ought to have gotten used to it. Then my phone finally turned on Tuesday morning. Mom, you were really hurtful, Jessica. Melanie is furious. You ought to say you're sorry. I gazed at the display. My actions? Did they want me to say I was sorry? I won't even mention how they made fun of me behind my back. Not a shred of responsibility. The same old song and dance. Melanie's emotions were important, but mine weren't. Without answering, I put my phone down. My cousin Lisa called me that evening. Being one of the few people who truly understood what it was like to deal with my parents, Lisa was more than just family. Lisa and I had a lot in common, because her mother, my dad's sister, had always been the family's odd man out. When I picked up, she exclaimed, Dude, what on earth went wrong? I let out a sigh. Have you heard? Oh, she replied. My mother received a call from Aunt Carol, who was very detailed about how Jessica destroyed the wedding weekend. I gave a sour laugh. Obviously. So, what really took place? I told her. The situation where you have one advantage. The chat that was overheard, how my mother had chuckled. Lisa whistled quietly. Whoa, that's on another level. All right, so what will you do? She inquired. I paused. I'm not sure, I said. A part of me feels compelled to speak up, call them out. However, there is a part of me that simply wants to go on. Lisa remained silent for a moment. You know what's funny? She asked. They would have claimed that you were spoiling Melanie's moment if you had approached them at that precise moment. But now you're hurting the family because you left in silence. I let out a breath. Exactly, Lisa stated. All they want is to control the narrative. What's fair isn't important. Making ensuring Melanie is never the bad guy is the goal. I collapsed back onto my sofa. I'm so over it. I understand, Lisa answered. Perhaps now is the time to quit playing their game. My mother texted me, but I didn't reply. I received another one a day later. Mom, come on over, Jess, so we can discuss this. It sounded quite reasonable. However, I understood the true meaning of talk about this. My dad let out a loud sigh, and my mom wrung her hands while we sat in the living room. It entailed being informed that I was making things tough, that it was only a joke, and that I was overreacting. I didn't intend to fall into that trap. I responded with a straightforward message instead. Me. Nothing is worth discussing. I heard what Melanie and you had to say. That was sufficient. The answer was prompt. Mom, you're acting absurdly. Jessica, this is family. For something so little, you don't just cut off relatives. I gazed at the term, tiny. It's funny how, in my case, it was always small. When Melanie's demands weren't met, it was the world's end. When did I stand up for myself at last? It was me who was acting dramatic. Me? Then taking a little time off shouldn't be a huge thing, right? No answer. I avoided them for a week. Nothing, no check-ins, no family calls. And what do you know? It was calm. I had no idea how draining it was to always control their expectations and to minimize myself in order to maintain harmony. Then Melanie called on Sunday. I contemplated disregarding it. However, my curiosity overcame me. My response was a bland hello. Oh my God, at last, she sighed. You were ignoring her, Mom said. I needed some time off. She let out a loud sigh. Look, I have no idea why you're acting so extravagantly over this. Hey, I was kidding that night. You were far too serious about it. I tightened my jaw. Melanie, you weren't kidding. It wasn't hilarious, even if you were. She let out a moan. Dear God, please stop acting as though I killed your cat or something. You had no date at all. Giving the slot to someone who genuinely needs it made logical. I inhaled deeply. Melanie, you didn't simply take my +1. You used every opportunity to remind me that you are more important than I am. Mom also supported you. Once more, quiet. Then she sneered. So what? Are you going to interrupt me because of this? No, I answered in a composed tone. But I'm tired of going out of my way for people who don't appreciate me. Oh my God. She chuckled as if I were being absurd. You're not kidding. Yes. Whoa, she exclaimed. I guess you're not as laid back as you once were. I suppose not, I replied. And you know what? That's a positive thing. After that, I didn't hear from Melanie for some time. I chose not to respond to my mother's subsequent guilt trip texts. Then I received a mail from Lisa a month later. Lisa, hey, dude. This is not something you will believe. Me. Now what? Lisa, a family vacation is being planned by your parents. And you know what? You weren't invited. I gave my phone a blink. Me, you're not serious. Lisa, not at all. Hawaii will be their destination. Aunt Carol told Mom about it. I had a weird, empty sensation in my chest. Not a shock, not melancholy. Just to be sure, I had always suspected this very thing. They stopped considering me family the moment I stopped being the doormat. I exhaled deeply and set my phone down. I had two options. I could allow this to shatter me to demonstrate that I would never be sufficient for them, regardless of what I did. Or, this could serve as evidence that I made the proper choice, that I didn't require their blessing, that perhaps I was at last free for the first time in my life. I grabbed my phone once more and sent Lisa a text. Me. What do you know? Fuck them. Give them permission to travel. Without me, let them have their ideal small family. Lisa, definitely. You're worthy of better. I grinned. Yes, I did. When you stop chasing people, life becomes surprisingly peaceful. I anticipated the typical phone calls and guilt trips after learning about the Hawaii trip. However, nothing appeared. No follow-ups. No justifications. Nothing but quiet. And truthfully, it was rather relieving. I plunged headfirst into my task. I resumed my running. I spent more time with Lisa, not continually checking my phone to see if I had said something incorrectly, or if I was disappointing someone felt nice. I was free of having to control other people's emotions for the first time in my life. Lisa asked me to join her for drinks, about 2 weeks after the trip. As she gave me a glass of wine, she remarked, "You seem suspiciously happy right now. I suppose I have simply been feeling lighter." I swirled the glass as I spoke. She arched an eyebrow. Lighter? Indeed. I'm not sure. I feel as though I'm no longer required to continuously keep up with them. If they are disappointed, I don't have to care. It is liberating. Lisa grinned. You seem to be waking up at last. I took a sip of wine and said, I suppose so. However, I must confess that I still question whether they even realized I wasn't there. Oh, they saw, Lisa remarked. Your mom was complaining about how Jessica made things awkward by not coming according to Aunt Carol, who told my mom. I gave a snort. Obviously, Jessica made things awkward. Not Jessica might have been hurt. Lisa's gaze flickered. Yes, I said. I suppose I shouldn't be shocked. You know what? Lisa inclined herself forward. Ignore them. You've tried to get their attention long enough. Perhaps it's time to put yourself first. She was not mistaken. My phone buzzed 3 days later while I was at home browsing Netflix. Mom. I took a moment to look at the screen before responding. Hey? Jessica. My mother stated sharply. Where have you been? I blinked. What? It's been weeks since we last saw you. When we informed you about the trip, you didn't even reply. It nearly made me chuckle. When did we inform you about the journey? As if that were an invitation. I said, I wasn't invited. We didn't think you'd want to come after the wedding turmoil. She sighed. Oh, so you made an assumption? She responded, as if I were the one who was being unreasonable. You've been so distant lately. I wonder why, I retorted. She let out a sigh. I truly believe that you are exaggerating this entire situation, Jessica. Am I? Yes, she replied. You are aware of Melanie's nature. She meant nothing when she said that. I should simply let it go then. Yes, she replied right away. It's family. You have to let things go sometimes. I remarked. It's funny that I'm the only one who ever has to let things go. My mother fell silent. You know, I went on. You would have accused me of spoiling Melanie's special day if I had spoken anything about her actions at the wedding. However, I'm being theatrical when I simply go without saying anything. That is unfair. No, I replied. It's entirely equitable. A long pause ensued. Then my mother remarked, Well, I just hope you don't regret this, in that acerbic tone she often used when she finished a conversation. What do you regret? She responded. Cut off your family. I gave a small smile. Perhaps you ought to have treated me like family in the first place if you're truly worried about me cutting you off. Jessica, I said, I have to leave. And I was the one who hung up this time. The problem is that I anticipated feeling bad afterwards, as if I had stepped over an imperceptible boundary that was irrevocable. I didn't feel bad about putting my phone down, though. I was at ease. They wanted me to be the villain. It had always operated that way. I was the challenging child. Melanie was the golden child, the one who got away with anything. The one who is sensitive, the person who reacted too much, no more. There were no additional calls for a week. Then Melanie arrived at my apartment one morning. She was standing on my porch with her fancy handbag slung over her shoulder, looking effortlessly flawless, as always. When I opened the door, Jess, she said, grinning as if nothing had occurred. May I enter? I paused. However, my curiosity overcame me. Yes, I replied, moving aside. Melanie came in and settled herself on my couch right away. She brushed her flawless blonde hair behind her ear and added, So, what are you up to? I squinted. What are you saying? She gave a shrug. I mean, you've been really aloof lately. Have I? Jess. She smiled condescendingly at me, as she always did when she felt I was being challenging. See, I understand. It was a hectic wedding. However, it is now over. You no longer need to be angry. I clenched my jaw. I'm not angry. You're behaving crazy. I just finished, I uttered. Melanie scowled. What have you finished? The one who bends is always the one who is excluded, the person who is meant to comprehend while everyone else receives what they desire. Melanie's grin wavered. Oh my God. Are you really doing this? Yes, I replied coolly. Melanie's face became stern. You're not exactly innocent in this situation, you know. You've always been a little challenging. My stomach grew constricted. Hard? She waved a hand and added, You understand what I mean. You become extremely sensitive to everything. There was no comedy in my laughter. I don't allow people walk all over me. Is that right? Melanie's grin dimmed. Jess, hurry up. Will you actually turn this into a full-length affair? I stated that it wasn't a whole thing. I'm simply exhausted. I'm sick of acting like I don't mind being subordinate to you. I'm sick of making things simple for other people. Melanie's mouth became thinner. You're just going to cut us off. So what? I declared. I'm going to give up trying. Melanie's gaze flickered. Whoa. I assumed you had moved past the turmoil of your early years. Yes, I said. I believed I had to. Melanie got to her feet. Well, I hope your small act of defiance is enjoyable. But when you understand how much you need us, don't come to me in tears. I grinned. It's funny. I was going to tell you the same thing. Melanie remained silent despite her eyes narrowing. She snatched up her handbag and rushed to the door. Over her shoulder, she murmured, Jess, have a nice life. I intend to, I answered, and I knew I meant it when the door clicked behind her. I set my phone on quiet and cuddled up with a glass of wine on the couch that evening. I wasn't waiting for a call for once, and I didn't feel like I was missing anything for the first time in my life. Would you believe me if I told you that severing my ties with my family provided me more than simply peace? In this tale, a daughter eventually came to the realization that she was better off without the folks who made her feel inferior. My last conversation with Melanie was a month ago. My mother was silent for a month. My dad stopped sending me passive-aggressive texts for a month. A month during which my family was merely a supporting cast in a television program I had stopped watching. Nevertheless, I felt as though I was still waiting even after I had finished trying. Awaiting the subsequent phone conversation, the next charge, the next guilt trip. However, it never materialized. Rather, life went on. I began attending therapy. I wanted to know why I had spent so much of my life chasing after indifferent people. Not because I was some damaged mess that needed to be fixed. Dana, my therapist, was a straightforward woman in her 40s who quickly saw through my attempts to minimize the situation. As she flipped through her notes during our second session, she explained, Your family treated you like an afterthought for years, and when you finally said enough, they acted like you were the problem. I let out a sigh. Yes, her head was cocked. Why do you sound startled, Jessica? I blinked. What are you saying? They have always been like this, she remarked. You just quit playing your part at last. Her remarks were like a kick to the stomach. She was correct. I had been assuming the role of the neglected daughter for years, the person who was expected to take it all in stride and give me whatever attention I received. My family was unsure of what to do with me now that I had left that position. Dana went on to say, They're probably waiting for you to break. I let out a breath. Well, that is not going to occur. Dana grinned. Well done. I received the news a few weeks later. One evening as I was making dinner, Lisa called. Jess, she uttered, her voice brimming with a mixture of amazement and incredulity. You will not believe this. I put my spatula down. What? She identified it as Melanie. She and Brad are divorcing. I almost dropped my phone. What? Lisa chuckled. I understand. Crazy, huh? How? Brad cheated on her, apparently. I blinked. You're kidding, Lisa remarked. I wish I was. My mom has been furious since Melanie found out a few weeks ago, Aunt Carol informed me. My thoughts were racing as I leaned against the counter. Brad was never my favorite, but I didn't believe he was foolish enough to cheat. And, of all people, on Melanie? She wasn't exactly the kind to overlook things. Whoa, I whispered. Yes, Lisa replied. And you know who she initially sobbed to? I paused. Mom? Bingo. Lisa let out a sigh. Since marriage is hard, guess who has reportedly been telling her to just forgive him? I let out a groan. Oh, I suppose. Parents? Ding, ding, ding. I gave a head shake. They are, of course. Because they were into that. They had no desire to handle matters. All they wanted was for everything to return to normal. And they expected Melanie to take it easy now that it was her turn to suffer. This is the worst part, Lisa went on. Melanie is furious. I mean, I was really upset at them. I arched an eyebrow. Really? Oh, I see. I finally understand how you feel, she said to Aunt Carol. I chuckled, but it was insincere. Whoa. Took her a long enough time. Lisa let out a sigh. So you think she'll get in touch? I gave a shrug. Most likely. However, I'm not sure if I care. That was the reality. I'd wanted Melanie to see me for so long, to comprehend what it was like to be ignored. She did now. But for me, nothing changed as a result. I no longer required her approval. I received a text the following day. Melanie, hello. Can we have a conversation? I spent a lot of time looking at the message. I would have leaped at the offer a few months ago. I would have persuaded myself that this was the turning point. so we might once more be close after my sister finally understood. However, I was no longer that person. I responded with a text. Me. I hope all is well with you. However, I don't believe we have anything to discuss. I suddenly lost the last glimmer of hope I had been clinging to. It was pleasant. It was liberating. Lisa arrived with a bottle of wine later that evening. To severing toxic relationships, she remarked, lifting her glass. I clattered mine with hers, to at last deciding on myself, and I truly meant it for the first time in my life. I had severed them 6 months prior. Silence for 6 months. Peace for 6 months. After 6 months, I came to the conclusion that my life was better without the nagging undercurrent of bitterness and disappointment. I expected it to be more difficult. I anticipated missing them more. In actuality, though, I didn't. When I said something that my mother didn't agree with, I didn't miss the tight smile on her face. My dad would remain mute while Mom and Melanie picked on me, but I didn't miss that. The tiresome effort of trying to get noticed was something I didn't miss. My life grew lighter without them. I felt as though I could breathe once more. The stillness finally broke on a Saturday afternoon. My phone buzzed while I was reading on my couch. My gut twisted for a moment as I looked down. Mom, I answered against my better judgment. Hey? Jessica, my mother remarked in a strained tone. Your father is here. I felt sick to my stomach. How about him? Her voice broke as she said, He had a heart attack. He is in the medical facility. I took a seat. What? They say that it's serious. I closed my eyes tightly. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Which medical facility? I inquired. Before I could change my mind, I grabbed my keys and left the house after she instructed me. Melanie was already at the hospital when I arrived. She had her arms encircling her body as she sat in one of those horrible plastic chairs. She appeared small for the first time in maybe forever, and her face was pale. When she spotted me, she said, Jess, how is he doing? I inquired. She took a deep breath, stable, for the time being. I took a seat beside her. We both remained silent for a moment. Melanie then said, I didn't think you'd come. I nearly didn't, I acknowledged. Melanie smiled weakly. Indeed. That makes sense. For a while, we sat in silence. At last, she remarked, I think I understand now. I gave her a look. What do you get? She said, what it feels like to be on the outside. My parents kept telling me to get over it. Just accept it and move on after Brad, after everything fell apart. I remained silent. Melanie went on to say, and I kept thinking, why aren't they on my side? Why are they indifferent to my pain? She gave a small smile. And then I realized that you've probably been feeling that way for years. I breathed out slowly. Yes. Melanie took a quick look at her hands. I apologize, Jess. Indeed, I am. I wished to trust her. And I did, in part. However, I also understood how simple it was to say sorry when you were in pain. What transpired once the pain subsided would be the true test. I simply said, thank you. Once more, we sat in silence. After a short while, a nurse emerged and informed us that Dad was awake. Together, Melanie and I entered the room. In the hospital bed, my father appeared smaller and more frail than I had ever seen him. When he noticed us, he gave a slight smile. Weakly, he said, Hey girls. With tears in her eyes, Melanie murmured, Dad. With my arms folded, I stood at the foot of the bed. I remarked, You scared us. He grinned wearily. I didn't intend to. Melanie approached him and grasped his hand. I remained in my spot. Dad turned to face me and said, Jess, I'm happy you're here. Yes? I said in a cold voice. He gave a nod. I admit that I haven't been the greatest father. I arched an eyebrow. It would be an understatement. He let out a sigh. I understand. A long pause ensued. He found it difficult to speak. I apologize if I gave you the impression that you were unimportant. I gazed at him. I didn't feel that way because of you. You repeatedly demonstrated it to me. He shut his eyes. I understand. And now? I inquired. Once more, his eyes opened. I wished to perform better. My throat constricted. That's good, I remarked. But it doesn't seem to matter anymore. Jess, I said, you're my father, which is why I'm here. Additionally, I still care about it. However, I'm not here to make things better. I get it, he murmured quietly. I gave a nod. Well done. Melanie gave me a look that suggested she was shocked by my lack of warmth. However, I was being truthful, not cold. And that seemed plenty for once. A few days later, my dad was released from the hospital. Before he went, I paid him one visit, but after that, I avoided him. Melanie gave me several calls. She desired to eat lunch, make up lost time, make a new beginning. However, I wasn't prepared for that. Perhaps I would never be. Because here's the thing, you don't have to let someone back in just because they apologize. Furthermore, you don't owe someone anything just because you forgive them. My phone buzzed one evening while I was enjoying a glass of wine on my terrace. Melanie had texted me. Melanie, hello. I just wanted to let you know that you are on my mind. No need to answer. I adore you. I spent a lot of time looking at the message. After that, I set my phone aside and grinned to myself. It felt good to be considered. However, I didn't feel compelled to reply for once, because I had stopped waiting, and I knew that was the best conclusion I could give myself.